The dust rose in choking clouds around Sarah Mitchell's boots as she watched three of her father's best steers break from the herd and bolt toward the rocky outcrop, and in that moment she knew this drive through Cedar Valley might be the thing that finally broke her spirit after everything else had tried and failed. Her father had been dead for 6 months now, taken by pneumonia during the harsh winter of 1883, and her mother had followed him just 8 weeks later, her heart simply giving out from the grief. At 22 years old, Sarah found herself alone with a struggling cattle ranch outside of Prescott, Arizona territory, and a herd of 50 head that needed to be moved to summer pasture before the valley grass dried up completely. The ranch hands had left one by one after her father's death, seeking steadier pay elsewhere, and Sarah couldn't blame them. She had barely enough money to feed herself, let alone pay wages. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as she urged her paint mare Juniper after the wayward steers. The valley stretched before her in shades of gold and brown, dotted with juniper trees and sagebrush, the mountains rising purple in the distance. It was beautiful country, harsh and unforgiving, and Sarah had loved it her whole life. But today, alone with cattle that seemed determined to scatter to the four winds, she felt the weight of her isolation like a physical thing pressing down on her shoulders. She managed to turn the steers back toward the main herd, but two more immediately broke off in the opposite direction. Sarah bit back a curse that would have made her mother wash her mouth out with soap, even now. Juniper was tired. She could feel it in the mare's gait, and they had barely covered 3 miles. The summer pasture was still a full day's drive away, maybe more at this rate. A longhorn cow with a crumpled horn decided that moment was perfect for challenging Sarah's authority, lowering her head and refusing to move forward. Sarah circled around, waving her rope and shouting, but the cow just planted her feet more firmly. The rest of the herd began to mill about nervously, and Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. If they scattered now in this rocky terrain, she would never get them all back together. She might lose half of them, and that would mean losing the ranch for certain. The bank in Prescott was already breathing down her neck about the loan her father had taken out 2 years ago. She was so focused on the stubborn longhorn that she didn't hear the horse approaching until a man's voice called out, "Looks like you could use a hand, ma'am." Sarah's head snapped up, her hand instinctively moving toward the rifle in her saddle scabbard. A lone cowboy sat astride a buckskin gelding about 30 yards away, his hat tipped back to reveal a sun-weathered face and dark eyes that held no threat, only a kind of patient curiosity. He was young, maybe a few years older than her, with broad shoulders and the easy seat in the saddle that spoke of a lifetime spent on horseback. "I can manage," Sarah called back. But even as she said it, 3 more steers broke from the herd. The cowboy didn't wait for permission. He touched his heels to his buckskin and moved smoothly to turn the steers back, his rope already in hand. He worked with an economy of motion that Sarah recognized as true skill, not just competence. Within minutes, he had the breakaway steers back with the main herd and was helping her move the stubborn longhorn forward. When the herd was moving again in the right direction, the cowboy brought his horse alongside Juniper. Up close, Sarah could see he had a strong jaw shadowed with dark stubble, and his eyes were a deep brown that reminded her of polished mesquite wood. There was a gentleness in them that seemed at odds with the hardness of his lean, muscular frame. "Name's James Carson," he said, touching his hat brim. "I was heading south from Jerome. Saw you were having some trouble." "Sarah Mitchell," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. "And I appreciate the help, but I can handle my own herd." James looked at the cattle, then back at her, and something like understanding crossed his face. "No offense meant, Miss Mitchell, just seemed like the Christian thing to do, but I can see you have got things well in hand now." He started to turn his horse away, and Sarah felt a sudden rush of panic different from what she had felt with the cattle. Pride was one thing, but stupidity was another. She was exhausted. The cattle were unruly, and she had miles to go before she could rest. "Wait!" she called out, and hated how desperate the word sounded. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I am moving these cattle to summer pasture up in the high country. It is another day's drive, maybe more. If you are not in a hurry to get south, I could use the help. I cannot pay much, but I can offer hot meals and a place to sleep once we get to the line shack." James studied her for a long moment, and Sarah lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. She had learned long ago not to show weakness, not in this country where weakness could get you killed or worse. "I am not in any particular hurry," James said finally. And there was something in his voice, a warmth that made Sarah's chest tighten. "And I would be happy to help, Miss Mitchell, no pay necessary. Like I said, it is just the Christian thing to do." Sarah wanted to argue, but she was too tired and too grateful. "Thank you, Mr. Carson." "Just James," he said and smiled for the first time. First, it transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger, almost boyish. "Just James," Sarah echoed, and found herself almost smiling back before she caught herself and turned her attention back to the herd. They rode in silence for a while, working together to keep the cattle moving in the right direction. James seemed to anticipate the animals' movements almost before they happened, positioning himself perfectly to cut off potential breakaways. Sarah found herself relaxing slightly, the tension in her shoulders easing as she realized she didn't have to watch every single animal at once. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive. Sarah's shirt stuck to her back with sweat, and she could see Juniper's coat darkening with it. When they reached a small creek about 2 hours later, she called a halt to let the cattle and horses drink. James dismounted and led his buckskin to the water, and Sarah did the same with Juniper. The horses drank deeply, and Sarah knelt beside them, cupping the cold water in her hands and splashing it on her face and neck. It felt like heaven. When she looked up, she found James watching her. He looked away quickly, but not before she saw something in his expression that made her heart skip strangely. It had been a long time since a man had looked at her that way, with something like admiration mixed with interest. Not since before her parents died, when she had still gone to the Saturday dances in Prescott and let young men court her with nervous compliments and clumsy dancing. "How long have you been ranching?" James asked, breaking the silence as he refilled his canteen. "My whole life," Sarah said. "My father started the ranch when I was 5. We have 160 acres outside Prescott and grazing rights on another section of federal land. It is not much, but it is ours." She paused, then corrected herself. "It is mine now." "I am sorry for your loss," James said quietly, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The grief was still too fresh, too raw. She stood up quickly, brushing off her hands. "We should keep moving. I want to make it past the Narrows before we stop for the night." James didn't push, just nodded and swung back into his saddle. Sarah appreciated that more than she could say. She had gotten tired of the pitying looks and the intrusive questions from people in Prescott, the ones who thought a young woman had no business trying to run a cattle ranch alone. As they moved the herd forward again, Sarah found herself stealing glances at James. He sat his horse with unconscious grace, his body moving in rhythm with the animal beneath him. His hands were strong and capable on the reins, scarred from years of hard work. He was handsome, she admitted to herself, but it was more than that. There was something steady about him, something solid and dependable that called to something deep inside her. She pushed the thought away. She had no time for such foolishness. James was just passing through, helping out of kindness. Once they got the cattle to summer pasture, he would move on south, and she would probably never see him again. That was the way of things in this country. People came and went like tumbleweeds, blown by winds she couldn't understand or predict. The afternoon wore on, hot and dusty. They pushed the herd through a narrow defile between 2 rocky hills, and Sarah breathed a sigh of relief when they made it through without losing any animals. The cattle were settling down now, falling into the rhythm of the drive. A few of the older cows had emerged as leaders, and the rest followed their example. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, James rode up beside her again. "There is a good spot to camp about a mile ahead," he said. Wide meadow with a creek running through it, protected on 3 sides. I have camped there before passing through. You know this country well? Sarah asked. Well enough. I have been drifting for about 3 years now, picking up work where I can find it, done a bit of everything, cowboying, prospecting, even tried my hand at blacksmithing for a while. What brings you to Arizona territory? James was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. I am from Texas originally. Had a ranch there with my father and older brother. But my father died, and my brother and I, well, we did not see eye to eye on how things should be run. Seemed better to move on rather than stay and fight about it every day. Sarah heard the pain beneath the casual words and understood it in her bones. Family was complicated, and loss was never simple. That must have been hard leaving your home. It was, James admitted. But sometimes leaving is the only choice that makes sense. What about you? Any brothers or sisters who could help with the ranch? No, it was just me. My mother had a hard time with my birth. The doctor said she couldn't have any more children after that. I think my father always wished for a son, but he never said so. He taught me everything he knew about ranching, treated me like the son he never had. He must have been proud of you, James said, and there was such warmth in his voice that Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. I hope so, she said quietly. I am trying to keep his dream alive, but it is hard. The bank wants their money, the ranch needs repairs I cannot afford, and I cannot hire help without money. Some days I wonder if I should just sell out and move to town, find work as a seamstress or a teacher. Is that what you want, Cheat? James asked. Sarah looked out at the cattle moving steadily through the golden evening light, at the mountains rising majestic and eternal in the distance, at the big sky that seemed to go on forever. No, she said fiercely, this is my home. This is where I belong. I will fight for it as long as I have breath in my body. James smiled, and there was approval in his eyes. Good. The world has too many quitters already. It needs more fighters. They made camp in the meadow James had mentioned, and it was everything he had promised. The grass was thick and green, fed by the creek that bubbled over smooth stones. There were cottonwood trees along the water that would provide shade and firewood, and rocky outcrops that would shelter them from the wind. Sarah unsaddled Juniper and rubbed the mare down while James did the same for his buckskin. The cattle spread out to graze, tired enough from the day's drive that they weren't likely to wander. Still, Sarah and James took turns setting up a basic perimeter, using rope strung between trees with strips of cloth tied to it that would flutter and make noise if the cattle pushed against it in the night. While Sarah gathered firewood, James unpacked supplies from his saddlebags. She was surprised to see he carried more than just the basics. He had coffee, beans, bacon, dried apples, and even a small bag of cornmeal. A man gets tired of jerky and hardtack, he explained when he saw her looking. I like to eat well when I can. Sarah's own supplies were meager, just some jerky, stale bread and coffee. She had been rationing carefully, knowing she needed to make everything last. Seeing James's supplies made her realize just how hungry she was. James built up the fire with practiced efficiency and soon had bacon sizzling in a pan and coffee brewing in a battered pot. The smell made Sarah's mouth water. He mixed up cornmeal with water from the creek and fried it into corn cakes that were crispy on the outside and soft in the middle. They ate sitting on rocks near the fire, the darkness gathering around them like a blanket. The cattle made soft lowing sounds as they settled for the night, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Sarah couldn't remember the last time food had tasted so good. Thank you, she said after a while, for the help today and for sharing your supplies. My pleasure, James said. It is nice to have company. Gets lonely riding alone all the time. Is that why you drift? Because you are lonely? James stared into the fire, his face thoughtful. Maybe. Or maybe I'm looking for something I have not found yet. I do not know. What about you? Do you ever get lonely out on your ranch? Sarah considered the question. Yes, she said finally, especially after my parents died. The The silence in the house is the worst. I find myself talking to the horses and cattle just to hear a voice, even if it is my own. That is rough, James said softly. Nobody should have to go through loss like that alone. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and pop. Sarah found herself studying James in the flickering light, noticing the way his hair curled slightly at his neck, the strong line of his jaw, the gentle way he held his coffee cup, as if afraid of breaking it. "Where were you heading in Jerome?" she asked, curious about this man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. "Looking for mining work. Heard they were hiring at the United Verde, but I am not sure mining is for me. Spending all day underground, breathing rock dust and never seeing the sun, seems like a hard way to make a living." "As opposed to cowboying, which is so easy," Sarah said with a hint of humor. James laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made something flutter in Sarah's chest. "Fair point. But at least with cowboying, you have got the sky above you and the wind in your face. There is a freedom to it, even when the work is hard." "I know what you mean," Sarah said. "I love this country, even when it is trying to kill me. There's nowhere else I would rather be." "You are brave," James said, meeting her eyes across the fire. "Taking on a ranch alone, making this drive by yourself, a lot of men would not have the courage to do what you are doing." Sarah felt heat rise to her face that had nothing to do with the fire. "I am not brave. I am just stubborn. There is a difference." "I disagree," James said. "Stubborn is refusing to quit. Brave is being scared but doing it anyway. I saw the fear in your eyes when we met this morning, but you were doing it anyway. That is bravery." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. She looked down at her hands, work roughened and calloused, and felt a strange mix of pride and embarrassment. "My father used to say that fear was just good sense, and it was what you did with it that mattered." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Sarah said, her throat tight with emotion. "I wish he was here now. He would know what to do about the bank, about keeping the ranch going. I feel like I'm just stumbling around in the dark, hoping I do not fall off a cliff." James leaned forward, his expression serious. "You are doing fine, Sarah, better than fine. You are keeping your father's dream alive, and that is no small thing. Do not sell yourself short." The way he said her name, soft and warm, made something inside Sarah melt. She realized with a start that this was the first real conversation she had had with anyone since her mother's funeral. The people in Prescott talked at her, offering unwanted advice and thinly veiled criticism, but they did not talk with her. James listened when she spoke, really listened, and his words felt genuine, not just empty platitudes. "We should get some sleep," she said, standing up abruptly. The intimacy of the moment had become overwhelming. "Dawn comes early." James nodded and began cleaning up the dishes while Sarah checked on Juniper one more time. The mare nickered softly and nuzzled Sarah's shoulder. "Good girl," Sarah murmured, stroking the soft nose. "We are going to be okay. We are going to make it." She laid out her bedroll near the fire, and James spread his on the opposite side. Sarah lay down fully clothed, her rifle within easy reach, and stared up at the stars. They were brilliant out here, away from any town lights, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She could see the Milky Way, that river of light her mother had called the path to heaven. "James," she called softly across the fire. "Yes? Thank you. For today, I mean. I do not know what I would have done without your help." There was a pause, then James's voice came out of the darkness, gentle and sure. "I am glad I could help. Sleep well, Sarah." "You too." Sarah closed her eyes, and despite her worries about the ranch and the cattle and the uncertain future, she fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the warmth of the fire and the comforting knowledge that for tonight at least, she was not alone. She woke before dawn, as she always did, and found James already up and rekindling the fire. He had coffee brewing, and the smell pulled her fully awake. "Morning," he said with a smile. "Hope I did not wake you." "No, I always wake early, old habit." Sarah splashed cold water on her face from the creek and felt her brain slowly engage. The cattle were still peacefully grazing, and the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, pale pink and gold spreading across the horizon. They had a quick breakfast of leftover corn cakes and coffee, then saddled the horses and began gathering the cattle. The animals were well rested and less fractious than yesterday, and they made good time heading up into the higher country. The landscape changed as they climbed, the grassland giving way to pine forests and rocky meadows. The air grew cooler and sweeter, scented with pine and wildflowers. Sarah felt her spirits lift despite her fatigue. This was the country she loved best, wild and beautiful and free. James rode beside her, keeping up an easy conversation. He told her stories about his travels, funny incidents with stubborn mules, and narrow escapes from angry ranchers who thought he was rustling their cattle. He had a gift for storytelling, painting pictures with his words that made Sarah laugh out loud. She found herself telling him stories, too, about growing up on the ranch, about her parents and their dreams. She told him about the time she had tried to ride an unbroken horse when she was 14 and got thrown into a water trough, and about the winter when they had lost half their herd to a blizzard and her father had cried for the first time she had ever seen. "He must have loved those animals, James said. "He did, but I think he was crying more because he did not know how we were going to make it without them. That was the year he took out the bank loan. We used the money to buy new breeding stock, but we never quite caught back up. There was always something, some expense or emergency that ate up any profit we made." "Ranching is a hard business," James agreed. "My father used to say that ranchers did not do it for the money. They did it because they could not imagine doing anything else." "That sounds about right." By midday, they reached the summer pasture, a high meadow surrounded by pine-covered hills, with a small line shack near a spring. Sarah felt relief wash over her as the cattle spread out to graze on the lush grass. They had made it. The first hurdle was crossed. The line shack was small and primitive, just one room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table and chairs, and two narrow bunks built into the walls. But it was solid and weatherproof, and after a night under the stars, it looked like a palace to Sarah. James helped her unload her supplies and get settled. They worked together in comfortable silence, falling into an easy rhythm. Sarah was acutely aware of him in the small space, the way his shoulder brushed hers when they passed each other, the sound of his breathing, the warm, dusty smell of him mixed with leather and horse. When everything was settled and the horses were tended, James turned to her. "I should probably head out, let you get settled." Sarah's heart sank, though she tried to keep her face neutral. Of course he was leaving. He had helped her like he promised, and now he would move on. That was what drifters did, but she had gotten used to his company, to the way he made the work seem easier and the loneliness less oppressive. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Thank you again for your help. I could not have done this without you." James shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "The thing is, I was thinking. You are going to have to come back up here regularly to check on the herd. Make sure they are all accounted for and not wandering off or getting into trouble. That is a lot of riding for one person, especially when you have got work to do back at the ranch." "I can manage," Sarah said, though she had been worrying about exactly that. "I know you can," James said. "But what if you did not have to? What if you had help?" Sarah stared at him, afraid to hope. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I would like to stay if you will have me. I can help with the herd up here and with whatever needs doing at the ranch. Like I said yesterday, I'm not in any hurry to get anywhere, and I like this country. I like the work." He paused, then added quietly, "And I like the company." Sarah's heart was beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. "I still cannot pay much. Maybe room and board and a small wage when I can afford it." "That is more than fair," James said. "I'm not doing this for the money, Sarah. I am doing it because it feels right. I've been drifting for 3 years and I am tired of it. tired of not belonging anywhere, tired of being alone. When I saw you yesterday struggling with those cattle but not giving up, something just clicked into place. I cannot explain it better than that." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of this man, no matter how much his words moved her. "You are welcome to stay as long as you want," she managed to say, "and I'm grateful for the help. More grateful than I can say." James smiled, that warm, transforming smile that made her heart skip. "Then it is settled. Now how about we inventory the herd, make sure everybody made it here safely?" They spent the afternoon doing just that, riding through the meadow and counting cattle. All 50 head were accounted for, looking fat and content in the good grazing. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. This part was done. The cattle would fatten up over the summer, and in the fall she could sell the steers for a good price. If she was lucky, it might be enough to make a payment on the bank loan and buy supplies for the winter. That evening they cooked dinner together in the line shack. Sarah made beans and bacon while James baked biscuits in a Dutch oven set in the fireplace coals. It was cozy and domestic, and Sarah found herself imagining what it would be like if this were a permanent arrangement, if every evening could be like this, cooking and talking and laughing together. She pushed the thought away. James had said he would stay for now, but that did not mean forever. He was still a drifter at heart, and she could not let herself get too attached. But even as she thought it, she knew it was already too late. Something had taken root in her heart from the moment he had ridden up beside her in the valley, and it was growing stronger with every hour they spent together. After dinner, they sat outside the shack, watching the stars come out. The night was cool at this elevation, and Sarah wrapped herself in a blanket. James sat close beside her, and she was intensely aware of his warmth, the solid presence of him. "Tell me about your family," she said. "Your brother, the one you did not get along with?" James sighed. "Daniel. He is 5 years older than me, and he always thought that meant he knew better about everything. When our father died, he wanted to sell off half the herd and invest in oil speculation. Said ranching was dying and we needed to diversify. I thought that was crazy, throwing away our father's legacy on some get-rich-quick scheme. We fought about it for months, and finally I just left. Figured it was his ranch now, he could do what he wanted with it." "Do you regret leaving?" "Sometimes. I wonder how things turned out, whether Daniel made his fortune or lost everything. But mostly I think I made the right choice. I could not have stayed and watched him destroy what our father built. It would have eaten me alive." "I understand that," Sarah said. "That is how I feel about my ranch. It is not just land and cattle. It is my parents' dreams and hard work. It is my childhood and my future. I will do whatever it takes to hold on to it." "And you will," James said with conviction. "I can see the strength in you, Sarah. You are going to make it." She looked at him in the starlight, this man who had appeared out of nowhere, and somehow understood her in a way no one else ever had. On impulse, she reached out and took his hand. It was warm and calloused, and his fingers closed around hers gently. "Thank you for believing in me," she said softly. James squeezed her hand. "It is easy to believe in you." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. Sarah felt something shift inside her, some door opening that she had thought was locked forever. She was falling for this man, she realized, falling hard and fast, and there did not seem to be anything she could do to stop it. Eventually the cold drove them inside. They banked the fire and climbed into their separate bunks, but Sarah lay awake for a long time, thinking about the calluses on James's hand and the warmth in his eyes and the way he said her name. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, and they began the long ride back to Sarah's ranch. The cattle were settled and would be fine on their own for a week or two before they needed checking on. Sarah felt lighter than she had in months, and not just because the cattle drive was successfully completed. James rode beside her, and his presence made everything seem possible. They talked about everything and nothing as they rode. James wanted to know about the ranch, what needed repairs, and what her plans were. Sarah found herself telling him things she had not admitted to anyone else. Her fears about losing the place, her dreams of building the herd back up to what it had been in her father's prime. "The house needs a new roof," she admitted, "and the barn has some rotting boards that should be replaced before winter. The corral fence is falling apart in places, and the well pump needs maintenance. It is overwhelming when I think about all of it at once." "Then we will not think about all of it at once," James said practically. "We will tackle one thing at a time. I am pretty handy with carpentry, and I know my way around a roof. We will get it done." The way he said "we" made Sarah's chest feel tight with emotion. She had been alone for so long, carrying all the burden herself, that having someone to share it with felt almost miraculous. They reached the ranch late in the afternoon. The house was small but well built, with a front porch that caught the evening breeze. The barn and outbuildings showed their age, but they had good bones. James looked around appraisingly, and Sarah tried to see the place through his eyes, noting all the ways it fell short. "It is a good setup," James said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Your father chose his land well. Good water, decent grass, close enough to town for supplies, but far enough out for privacy. We can work with this." That "we" again. Sarah felt herself relaxing, believing for the first time that maybe she really could save this place. She showed James where he could bunk in the small room off the barn that had housed the ranch hands before they left. It was not fancy, just a narrow bed and a small stove, but it was clean and dry. James assured her it was more than adequate. That evening, Sarah cooked a proper meal in her mother's kitchen, using vegetables from the garden that had somehow kept producing despite her neglect. It felt strange to cook for someone else, to set two places at the table instead of one. But it was a good strange, something that eased the ache of loneliness that had been her constant companion. Over the next week, they fell into a routine. James proved to be as good as his word, tackling repairs with skill and efficiency. He re-shingled a section of the barn roof, replaced the rotting boards, and reinforced the corral fence. Sarah worked beside him when she could and took care of the daily chores when she could not. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs and movements. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk, watching the sun set over the mountains. James told her more about his travels, about the people he had met, and the places he had seen. Sarah shared memories of her parents, stories that made her laugh and cry. She found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone else, sharing her fears and hopes and dreams. One evening, about 10 days after they had returned from the summer pasture, Sarah was washing dishes while James dried. It was a companionable silence, comfortable and easy. But Sarah's mind was churning, thinking about how natural this all felt, how much she had come to depend on James's presence. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. "Of course." "Why did you really stay? I mean, I'm grateful that you did, but I keep wondering what made you decide to stay with a struggling ranch and a woman you barely knew instead of moving on to find paying work." James was quiet for a moment, carefully drying a plate. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure I can explain it. From the moment I saw you in that valley, something just felt right, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I've been drifting for 3 years, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, always looking for something without knowing what it was. And then there you were, stubborn and brave, and so determined not to give up. And I thought maybe this is what I've been looking for. A place to belong, a reason to stay." Sarah's hands stilled in the dishwater. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "And is it what you have been looking for?" James set down the plate and turned to face her fully. In the lamplight, his eyes were dark and intense. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, it is." The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Sarah dried her hands on her apron, her movements slow and deliberate, giving herself time to think. But her heart already knew what it wanted. "I am glad you stayed," she said softly. "These past weeks, having you here, It has made me realize how lonely I have been, not just since my parents died, but for a long time before that. I never really connected with anyone in Prescott, never felt like I fit in with the other young women with their tea parties and their gossip. I always felt like an outsider. You are not an outsider here, James said, taking a step closer. You belong here, on this land. Anyone with eyes can see that. I feel like I belong when I am with you, Sarah admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Like I do not have to pretend to be something I am not. Like I can just be myself, and that is enough. James reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, warm and gentle. Sarah, you are more than enough. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and any man would be lucky to stand beside you. Any man, Sarah whispered, her eyes searching his face. Or one man in particular? James smiled, soft and warm. One man in particular, he confirmed, if you will have him. Sarah's answer was to reach up and pull his face down to hers. Their first kiss was gentle and tentative, a question and an answer all at once. But then James's arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate, as if they were both trying to make up for all the lonely years in a single moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sarah rested her forehead against James's chest and listened to his racing heartbeat. I never thought I would feel this way about anyone, she said quietly. I always thought I was too rough, too independent, too much for any man to want. James tipped her face up to look at him. You are not too much. You are exactly right. And I want you, Sarah Mitchell. I want to stay here and help you build this ranch into something great. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to grow old with you if you will let me. Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. I want that too, she said, more than anything. They kissed again, and this time it was a promise, a commitment to whatever future they could build together. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened and grew. They were careful to maintain propriety, with James still sleeping in the bunkhouse and Sarah in the main house, but everyone who saw them together could see the love growing between them. When they rode into Prescott together for supplies, they faced curious stares and whispered comments, but Sarah held her head high, James's presence beside her giving her strength. At the mercantile, the owner's wife, Mrs. Henderson, cornered Sarah while James was loading supplies into the wagon. I heard you hired on a cowboy, she said, her tone implying all sorts of improper things. Is that wise, dear? A young woman alone with a strange man? Sarah met her gaze steadily. James Carson is a good man, and I'm lucky to have his help. The ranch would have failed without him. Still, people will talk. You know how they are? Let them talk, Sarah said firmly. I know the truth, and that is all that matters. Mrs. Henderson sniffed disapprovingly but said nothing more. Sarah left the store feeling triumphant. She was done caring what small-minded people thought. Her life was her own, and she would live it as she saw fit. That evening, sitting on the porch with James, she told him about the encounter. He frowned but did not seem surprised. I do not want to damage your reputation. You are not damaging anything, Sarah said. You are saving me in more ways than one. I do not care what they say in town. Still, maybe we should make things official, James said slowly. If you are willing. Sarah's heart skipped. What are you saying? James slid off his chair and knelt before her on the porch. He took her hand in both of his, looking up at her with such love in his eyes that Sarah felt breathless. I am saying that I love you, Sarah Mitchell. I think I have loved you from the moment I saw you in that valley, fighting to hold on to your dream. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of you. Will you marry me? Sarah felt joy bubble up inside her like a spring. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, James, I will marry you. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I never knew I could feel this way about anyone. James stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. When they finally broke apart, both smiling like fools, Sarah felt like her heart might burst from happiness. After so much loss and loneliness, she had found this, found him, found a future bright with hope. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Prescott. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, and James wore a new suit bought with the last of his savings. The ceremony was small, just a handful of neighbors and acquaintances, but Sarah did not care. All that mattered was James standing beside her, promising to love and cherish her for the rest of their lives. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and when James kissed her, Sarah felt like everything in her life had been leading to this moment. All the hardship and loss, all the struggle and loneliness, it had all been worth it to end up here, with this man, building a life together. They spent their wedding night in the ranch house, in the bed that had been Sarah's parents', and it felt right and good, claiming this space for their own new beginning. James was gentle and patient, and Sarah felt cherished in a way she never had before. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies, and afterward lay tangled together, whispering promises and dreams into the darkness. "I never thought I would be this happy," Sarah murmured, her head on James's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Neither did I," James said, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I was so lost before I found you. Now I feel like I have finally come home." "You have," Sarah said. "This is your home now, for as long as you want it." "Forever then," James said, and kissed the top of her head. "I choose forever." The next months were the happiest of Sarah's life. She and James worked side by side, repairing the ranch and building it back up. They rode up to check on the summer herd regularly, and every time Sarah saw the cattle fattening on the good grass, she felt a surge of hope. They were going to make it. Together, they were going to save this place. James proved to be not just a skilled cowboy, but also a shrewd businessman. He suggested they buy some chickens and start selling eggs in town, a small but steady source of income. He repaired the old smokehouse, and they began curing meat to sell. Every little bit helped, and slowly, painfully slowly, they began to chip away at the debt to the bank. In late September, they brought the cattle down from summer pasture. All 50 head had survived and thrived, and the steers were fat and healthy. James helped Sarah drive them to the buyer in Prescott, and she got a better price than she had dared hope for. It was enough to make a significant payment on the loan and buy supplies for winter, with a little left over. The banker missed her. Thornton seemed surprised to see her making such a substantial payment. "I must admit, Mrs. Carson, I did not think you would make it this long. A woman running a ranch alone. Well, the odds were against you." "I was not alone," Sarah said, squeezing James's hand, "and the odds do not matter when you are fighting for something you love." Mr. Thornton harumphed, but made note of the payment. "Well, keep this up, and you will have the loan paid off in a few years." It was a daunting timeline, but Sarah felt optimistic for the first time in over a year. They could do this. She and James together could build a life here. As fall turned to winter, they prepared the ranch for the harsh months ahead. James repaired the barn roof just in time, and the new shingles held strong against the first snowstorm. They had laid in plenty of supplies, and the small herd of cattle they had kept back for breeding were safe in the shelter of the home pastures. Winter in the Arizona high country could be brutal, but Sarah found she did not mind it as much this year. The long evenings trapped inside by snow and cold were cozy rather than lonely, with James there to share them. They played cards by the fire, read aloud from the small collection of books her mother had treasured, and talked about their plans for the spring. It was during one of these long winter evenings, curled up together on the old sofa while snow howled outside, that Sarah realized something was different. She had been feeling tired and slightly queasy for a few weeks, and her monthly courses had not come. At first she had dismissed it as stress or the change in diet with James cooking half the meals, but as the signs continued, she could no longer ignore the possibility. "James," she said hesitantly. I think I might be with child. James sat up straight, his eyes wide. Are you sure? Not completely, but the signs are there. I've not had my courses in 2 months, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. A slow smile spread across James's face, transforming it with joy. A baby? We are going to have a baby? It looks that way, Sarah said, and felt her own smile growing to match his. James let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly. This is wonderful. Amazing. We are going to be parents. Sarah laughed at his enthusiasm, some of her own nervousness melting away. You are happy about this? Happy? Sarah, I am thrilled. A little scared, maybe, but thrilled. We are going to have a family. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. A family. Something she had thought she might never have, after losing her parents and facing the possibility of losing the ranch. But here she was, married to a man she loved with all her heart, with a baby on the way and a future that looked brighter every day. I wish my parents could have known, she said softly. They would have loved you, and they would have been so excited about a grandchild. James held her close. I wish I could have met them, but I think they know somehow, and I think they would be proud of you, of how you have fought to keep their dream alive. Our dream now, Sarah corrected. This is our ranch, our dream, our future. Our dream, James agreed, and kissed her again. The winter months passed slowly, and Sarah's pregnancy progressed. She was sick frequently in the early months, and James took over more of the chores, insisting she rest and take care of herself. Sarah chafed at the inactivity, but she had to admit she appreciated the care. James was attentive and gentle, worrying over every twinge and discomfort, fetching her water and crackers when the nausea was bad, rubbing her back when she ached. By spring, her belly was beginning to show, a small but definite swell under her dress. They rode up to check on the location for summer pasture, planning ahead for the next drive. Sarah was still capable of riding, though James fussed over her constantly, afraid she would overdo it. I am pregnant, not made of glass, she told him with exasperation after he tried to help her down from her horse for the third time. I know, I am sorry, I just worry about you, about both of you. Sarah softened, reaching up to cup his cheek. I know you do, and I love you for it, but I need to stay active. The doctor said light exercise is good for me and the baby. They had ridden into Prescott to see the doctor a few weeks earlier, and he had confirmed what Sarah already knew. She was about 4 months along, and the baby should arrive sometime in late August or early September. He had pronounced her healthy and strong, and said he saw no reason she could not continue with light ranch work as long as she felt up to it. As spring turned to summer, they prepared for the cattle drive. Sarah's belly was large enough now that she could not comfortably ride all day, so James made the drive alone this time, moving the 50 head of cattle they had kept through the winter up to the high pasture. Sarah hated being left behind, but she knew it was necessary. She spent the time he was gone working in the garden, putting up vegetables for the winter, and sewing tiny clothes for the baby. James returned 3 days later, tired and dusty, but smiling. All 50 head made it safe, he reported. Plus, we have got 7 new calves from the cows. The herd is growing. Sarah hugged him tightly, or as tightly as she could with her belly between them. That is wonderful news. We are going to be all right, James. We are actually going to make it. I never doubted it, James said, but his smile suggested he had doubted it plenty of times. They both had. But here they were, beating the odds, building something solid and lasting. In late August, Sarah's pains started. They came in the middle of the night, sharp cramps that woke her from sleep. She lay still for a moment, trying to assess whether this was the real thing or false labor, and then felt a gush of fluid between her legs. James, she said, shaking his shoulder. James, wake up. The baby is coming. James bolted awake, instantly alert. Now? Are you sure? My water just broke. We need to get Mrs. Jensen. Mrs. Jensen was a neighbor woman who had helped birth half the babies in the county. She lived about 5 miles away, and James dressed quickly and rode out into the darkness to fetch her. Sarah tried not to panic, breathing through the contractions that were coming faster now. Her mother had died too soon to tell her much about childbirth, and Sarah realized she was terribly unprepared for what was happening to her body. James returned with Mrs. Jensen just as the sun was rising. The older woman took one look at Sarah and took charge immediately. "All right, dear, let us get you comfortable. First babies take a while, so we have got time. James, I need hot water and clean towels." James looked torn between wanting to stay with Sarah and wanting to help. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Go, do what she says, I will be all right." But as the hours wore on and the pain intensified, Sarah was not sure she would be all right. The contractions were crushing, overwhelming, making her feel like her body was being torn apart. She cried out despite her determination to be brave, and James held her hand, looking nearly as terrified as she felt. "You are doing wonderfully," Mrs. Jensen encouraged. "Just breathe through it, dear. That is right. You're strong. You can do this." Sarah wanted to argue that no, she could not do this. It was too much, too painful. But then another contraction gripped her, and she could only breathe and push and pray it would end soon. Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, Mrs. Jensen said, "All right, Sarah, the baby is crowning. One more big push." Sarah gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed. There was a moment of intense pressure and pain, and then suddenly relief as the baby slipped free. A thin, angry wail filled the room, and Sarah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and overwhelmed. "It is a boy," Mrs. Jensen announced, quickly cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a soft blanket. "A big, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Sarah's arms, and Sarah looked down at her son in wonder. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus on her face. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama." James was beside her, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "You are amazing, Sarah. You did it." "We did it," Sarah corrected. She looked up at James, at the love and awe in his face, and felt her heart swell with so much emotion she thought it might burst. What should we name him? They had discussed names over the past months, but had never quite decided. Now, looking at their son, Sarah knew. "Thomas," she said. "After my father. Thomas James Carson." James smiled through his tears. "Thomas, it is perfect." Mrs. Jensen stayed for a few more hours, making sure Sarah and the baby were doing well. She showed them how to nurse, how to change, and swaddle him. By the time she left, promising to check in again in a few days, both Sarah and James were exhausted but happier than they had ever been. That night, Sarah lay in bed with baby Thomas sleeping in a cradle James had built beside her. James sat in a chair next to them, watching them both with an expression of such tender love that it made Sarah's throat tight with emotion. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you so much, James. Thank you for finding me in that valley. Thank you for staying." James reached over and took her hand. "I love you too, and I am the one who should be thanking you. You gave me a home, a purpose, a family. You gave me everything." "We gave it to each other," Sarah said. "That is how this works, remember? Together." "Together," James agreed. "Always." The first months with baby Thomas were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. He was a good baby, healthy and growing fast, but he needed constant attention. Sarah was tired all the time, but she had never been happier. James was a doting father, taking over the night feedings whenever he could, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. They had to hire a hand to help with the cattle drive that fall, a young man named Peter who was grateful for the work and did not mind taking orders from a woman. With his help and James's skill, they got the cattle down from summer pasture and to market safely. The sale brought in even more money than the previous year, and Sarah was able to make another significant payment on the loan. Mr. Thornton was less skeptical this time, almost respectful. "You are doing well, Mrs. Carson. At this rate, you will have the loan paid off within 2 years." 2 years. It was still a long time, but Sarah could see the light at the end of the tunnel now. They were going to make it. The ranch would be theirs, free and clear, and they could build the life they dreamed of. As Thomas grew, he became the joy of their lives. He was a happy, curious baby, and then toddler, fascinated by the animals and the wide open spaces. James made him a small wooden horse that he's dragged everywhere, and Sarah sewed him tiny cowboy clothes. They took him with them on short rides around the ranch, Thomas secure in James's arms, his eyes wide with wonder at everything he saw. The ranch continued to prosper. With careful management and hard work, they built the herd back up to over 100 head. They added more chickens, some pigs, and even a milk cow. The garden produced bountifully, and Sarah spent long hours canning and preserving for the winter months. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way nothing else had ever been. When Thomas was 2 years old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because life was less stressful with the ranch doing well. James was just as attentive as he had been the first time, maybe even more so, determined to take care of his growing family. Their second child, a girl they named Emily after James's mother, arrived on a warm spring day. The birth was faster than Thomas's had been, and Mrs. Jensen pronounced Sarah a natural at this. Emily was smaller than Thomas had been, with Sarah's auburn hair and James's dark eyes. She was perfect. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and touch her constantly. James had to remind him gently to be soft with her, and Sarah's heart melted watching her little family together. Thomas patting Emily's head with careful reverence, James hovering protectively over both children, ready to catch Thomas if he got too rambunctious. 2 years later, another son arrived, William, and then 2 years after that, another daughter, Grace. The house that had seemed so empty and lonely after Sarah's parents died was now filled with the noise and chaos of 4 young children. Sarah was exhausted most of the time, but deeply, profoundly happy. James proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching the children to ride almost as soon as they could walk, telling them stories at bedtime, tucking them in with prayers and kisses. Sarah would watch him with their children and fall in love with him all over again. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. In the 5th year of their marriage, Sarah made the final payment on the bank loan. She and James rode into Prescott together, the deed to the ranch in a leather folder. Mr. Thornton processed the payment and handed her the deed, finally stamped, "Paid in full." "Congratulations, Mrs. Carson, you beat the odds." Sarah took the deed with trembling hands. The ranch was theirs, truly theirs, with no debt hanging over them. She looked at James, saw the pride and joy in his face, and felt tears spill down her cheeks. They celebrated that night with a special dinner, the children dressed in their Sunday best. Sarah raised her glass of buttermilk and made a toast. To family, to hard work, and to never giving up on your dreams. James clinked his glass against hers. "And to the day I saw a stubborn woman herding cattle alone through a valley and decided to ride up and help her." "Best decision I ever made, not shooting you for presuming," Sarah said with a laugh. The children, too young to understand the significance but caught up in the festive moods, cheered and clapped. Sarah looked around the table at her family, at the home they had built together, and felt a bone-deep satisfaction. This was what her parents had dreamed of when they started the ranch all those years ago. This was what she had fought so hard to preserve, and it had been worth every moment of struggle. As the years passed, the children grew. Thomas developed his father's way with horses and his mother's stubbornness. Emily was gentle and kind, with a gift for gardening. William was adventurous and reckless, always getting into scrapes, and Grace was quiet and thoughtful, often found reading in corners when she should have been doing chores. Sarah and James grew older together. their love deepening with each passing year. There were hard times still, droughts and hard winters, injuries and illnesses, but they faced everything together. The ranch continued to prosper, and eventually they were able to buy additional land, expanding their holdings. When Thomas turned 21, James officially made him a partner in the ranch. It was the Carson Ranch now, not just Sarah's parents' dream, but a legacy they were building for their children and grandchildren. Thomas took to the responsibility seriously, working side by side with his father, learning everything James had learned in his years of hard work. Emily married a young man from Prescott, a school teacher named David, and they built a house on a corner of the ranch land. William, true to his restless nature, went off to seek adventure, promising to return when he had seen enough of the world. Grace surprised everyone by announcing her intention to study medicine, and Sarah and James supported her dream, even though it meant sending their youngest daughter away to school in San Francisco. On their 20th wedding anniversary, James took Sarah up to the line shack where they had spent that first night after moving the cattle to summer pasture. It had been repaired and expanded over the years, now a cozy cabin that they sometimes used for getaways from the busy ranch. They sat on the porch as the sun set, much as they had done that first evening, but so much had changed. They were older now, with silver threading through their hair and lines etched on their faces from years of sun and laughter. But the love between them was as strong as ever, maybe stronger, tempered by years of working side by side and raising a family together. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked, her head on James's shoulder. "Staying here instead of continuing on south that day? You could have had adventures, seen the world, had an easier life." James laughed softly. "Easier? Maybe. Better? Never. Sarah, riding up to help you that day was the best thing I ever did. You gave me everything I was searching for without knowing it. A home, a purpose, a family to love. I have never regretted it for a single moment." Even when William broke his arm falling out of the barn loft, or when the drought nearly wiped us out that third year, or when Emily had scarlet fever and we thought we might lose her? "Even then," James said firmly, "every struggle, every hardship, I would go through it all again to end up right here, right now, with you." Sarah lifted her face for a kiss, and James obliged happily. After 20 years, his kisses still made her heart flutter. "I love you, James Carson," she said. "Thank you for riding up beside me in that valley and never riding away again." "I love you too, Sarah Carson, and I never will ride away. This is where I belong, right beside you for as long as we both shall live." They sat together as the stars came out, the same stars they had watched that first night, and Sarah felt complete. Her parents' dream had become her dream, and then their dream, and now it was their children's dream too. The ranch would go on, passed down through generations, a legacy of hard work and determination and love. Years continued to pass in a steady rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, and they gave Sarah and James their first grandchildren, a pair of twin boys who were as wild and rambunctious as their Uncle William had been. Emily and David added 2 more grandchildren to the growing family, a boy and a girl. William eventually returned from his adventures, bringing with him a wife he had met in California and stories that kept the children enthralled for hours. He settled down on another corner of the ranch land and started raising horses, a natural talent he had inherited from his father. Grace finished her medical studies and returned to Arizona, opening a practice in Prescott. She remained unmarried, devoted to her patients, but she visited the ranch often, doting on her nieces and nephews. Sarah and James grew old together, their bodies slowing but their spirits still strong. They still rode out together on warm days, checking on the herd, remembering that first cattle drive when they had found each other. The ranch was thriving, expanded to over 1,000 acres with herds of cattle and horses. Their children had all found their paths, and their grandchildren were growing up with the same love of the land that had sustained Sarah through the darkest times. On a warm summer evening when Sarah was 68 and James was 73, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Thomas and his family lived in the main house now, with Sarah and James having moved to a smaller house they had built nearby. But they still gathered for Sunday dinners, the whole sprawling family, children and grandchildren, and now even a few great-grandchildren, filling the house with noise and laughter. "We did well, did we not?" Sarah said softly, her hand in James's. James squeezed her fingers gently. His hands were gnarled with arthritis now, but his grip was still strong. "We did better than well. We built something that will last long after we are gone." "I am so grateful," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "for every moment, for you finding me that day, for your decision to stay, for every year we have had together." "I am the grateful one," James insisted. "You took in a drifter with nothing to his name and gave him a life beyond his wildest dreams." "We gave each other a life," Sarah corrected, as she always did. "That is how love works, remember? Together." "Together," James agreed. "Always together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors paint the sky, the mountains purple in the distance, the valley where they had met spread out before them in shades of gold. Somewhere in the distance cattle lowed softly, and the evening breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. Sarah thought back to that young woman she had been, desperate and alone, driving cattle through a valley and wondering if she had the strength to keep going. She had been so sure she had to do everything herself that accepting help was weakness. And then James had ridden up beside her and taught her that true strength was knowing when to let someone in, when to share the burden, when to open your heart even when it was terrifying. "Do you remember how stubborn I was that first day?" she asked with a soft laugh. "I almost sent you away." "I remember. I am glad you changed your mind." "I am too." "James, if I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing." James lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Neither would I, my love. Not a single thing." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, Sarah and James remained on the porch, hands clasped, hearts joined, exactly as they had been that first night beside the campfire in Cedar Valley. The journey that had started with a chance meeting on a dusty cattle drive had become a lifetime of love and partnership, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that it was the greatest blessing of her life. The ranch would continue. Their love would echo through the generations and the children and grandchildren they had raised, and the legacy of that single moment when a drifting cowboy had ridden up beside a lonely rancher and offered help would live on forever in the family they had built together. And so the story that began in a valley with cattle and dust and desperate hope ended here, decades later, with love and family and a dream fulfilled beyond measure. Sarah Mitchell Carson had fought for her parents' dream and won, but in the process she had gained something infinitely more precious. She had found her partner, her soulmate, the other half of her heart. And together they had built not just a ranch, but a home, a family, and a love that would endure for all time. As they finally rose to go inside for the night, Sarah took one last look at the valley spread out before them, now invisible in the darkness, but still there, still beautiful, still home, still. And she smiled, thinking of that young woman who had been herding cattle alone, never dreaming that help was riding toward her, never imagining that the dust cloud on the horizon would bring with it the love of her lifetime. But that was exactly what had happened. A cowboy had joined her side, and he had never ridden away again. And that, Sarah thought, as James's arm came around her waist to steady her as they walked inside together, had made all the difference in the world.